So we were going through some research and stumbled upon something kind of wild. It really changed how we think about some of our everyday, health choices.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like imagine someone telling you that not having enough of this one thing in your diet could be almost as bad for you as smoking. Like seriously, long-term smoking, bad.
Wow. Okay. That definitely gets your attention.
Right. And that's the kind of heavy weight that science is starting to put on omega-3 fatty acids. It's a big deal, really.
I can see why you'd say that. That's a pretty powerful statement to make, and it certainly doesn't sound like just another fad diet or health trend.
Not at all. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today, all about omega-3s. There are these, well, essential fats, and there's more and more research showing how important they are for living longer, having a healthy heart, and just feeling good overall. We've been looking at a lot of studies about this, and the results are pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, and we know you, our listener, are probably busy and want to get right to the heart of the matter. So we'll cut through all the fluff and give you the important stuff. We'll make it clear and easy to understand without getting bogged down in all the scientific terms.
Right. The goal here is to tell you exactly why omega-3s are so important, what all this research is saying about them, and the best part, what you can do to make sure you're getting enough. We've been focusing especially on those studies that look at what happens in the long run if you don't have enough omega-3s. It's pretty serious stuff.
And one of the first things you realize when you start digging into this research is that omega-3s are, well, they're essential. Your body can't make them on its own, so you got to get them from what you eat. And that's where the problem comes in. Despite being so important, people don't talk about them enough.
I know, right? It's like they're kind of hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And when we talk about where to find these omega-3s, well, oily fish and other stuff from the sea are the main sources. But the big takeaway from all this science is clear. If you want to live a long, healthy life, especially when it comes to your heart and preventing diseases, you need enough of these fats. It's as simple as that.
It really is, and it's not just some random idea either. There's solid evidence. One study that really caught our eye was from Harvard back in 2009.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, what was crazy about it was they found that not getting enough omega-3s was actually the sixth biggest cause of preventable death in the U.S. Just think about that for a sec. A nutrient deficiency, up there with all the major things we know are bad for us.
84,000 deaths every year, according to that study. To give you some perspective, they said that risk was about the same as eating a lot of trans fats. The stuff everyone knows is terrible for you. It really shows you just how important these omega-3s are, We're talking life and death here.
No kidding. And it's not just a U.S. problem either. Research is showing that tons of people all over the world aren't getting enough of these essential fats. And that's where this thing called the omega-3 index comes in. It's a super helpful way to measure how much EPA and DHA. Those are the two main omega-3s we're talking about you have in your blood, or more specifically, in your red blood cells.
It basically gives you a report card on your omega-3 levels over time.
Right, so it's not just about what you ate yesterday. It's a bigger picture of your omega-3 status. So based on all this research, what should we be aiming for? What's a healthy omega-3 index?
Well, a lot of studies have shown that if your omega-3 index is above 8%, you're much less likely to die from sudden cardiac death. But if it's 4% or lower, well, that's where things get a little scary. Some researchers actually call those levels dangerously low.
Dangerously low, that's pretty alarming. So it sounds like there are a lot of people out there walking around without enough omega-3s, and that's putting their health, especially their hearts, at risk. Let's dig into that connection a bit more. The research has uncovered some pretty big findings when it comes to heart health, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The link between omega-3s and a healthy heart is one of the strongest connections scientists have found. And the statistic that really jumps out is this: a high omega-3 index could mean your risk of sudden cardiac death drops by a whopping 90%.
90%, that's a huge difference. So how do these omega-3s, this EPA and DHA, actually work their magic on our hearts? What's the science behind it?
Okay, so there are a few key ways they help. First off, both EPA and DHA are rock stars at fighting inflammation. And we know that long-term inflammation is a major culprit behind heart disease. Second, they can actually help lower your blood pressure, which is huge because high blood pressure is a big risk factor for all sorts of heart problems. And lastly, they help keep your heart rhythm steady. That means they help prevent those dangerous, irregular heartbeats that can be fatal.
It's amazing how it all ties together, right? Reduce inflammation, keep blood pressure in check, and make sure your heart is beating properly. That's the trifecta for a healthy heart. And there are even some real-world examples out there that seem to support this, like take Japan, for instance.
Oh yeah, good point. When you look at countries where people eat a lot of fish, like Japan, they tend to live longer and have fewer heart problems. The average person in Japan lives about 5 years longer than the average American, and that's thought to be at least partly because of all the omega-3s they're getting from their fish-rich diet.
5 years, that's a significant difference. It really highlights the power of our food choices. But let's get back to that eye-opening comparison we talked about earlier, the one about low omega-3 levels being almost as bad as smoking. That really makes you stop and think.
It definitely does. Scientists use that comparison to really drive home how serious it is to be deficient in omega-3s. And the research backs them up on this. There have been studies that looked at different signs of aging and how long people live, and they found that the folks with the lowest levels of omega-3s in their blood actually had their lifespans shortened by a similar amount as long-term smokers.
Wow. So not getting enough of these essential fats could actually be as bad for you as something that everyone agrees is incredibly harmful. It really changes how we think about omega-3s. It's not just a nice to have, it's essential for a long, healthy life.
Exactly, and that's why experts are saying we shouldn't treat getting enough omega-3s as some optional extra. It needs to be up there with the biggies, like not smoking and maintaining a healthy weight. It's a fundamental pillar of good health.
So we've laid out the problem. Not enough omega-3s is a widespread issue, and it could have really bad consequences for your health, even shortening your life. But you mentioned earlier that there's good news, that fixing this isn't that hard. So let's walk our listeners through what they can do to boost their omega-3 levels. What's the first step?
All right, step one might surprise some people. Get tested. Remember that omega-3 index we talked about? That simple blood test can tell you exactly where your omega-3 levels stand. It's like the A1C test for blood sugar. You need to know your starting point before you can make real changes.
Makes sense. You can't fix what you don't know is broken. So
Yeah.
step one, get tested. What's next?
Step two is to get more EPA and DHA into your diet. Lots of health organizations and tons of research recommend aiming for at least 2 grams a day of EPA and DHA combined. You can do this by eating the right foods, taking supplements, or best of all, both.
Okay, 2 grams a day. Got it. What are some of the best foods for hitting that goal? We talked about marine sources earlier.
Yeah, so oily fish are your best bet. Think salmon, especially wild-caught, sardines, mackerel, even herring. They're all loaded with EPA and DHA. Try to eat those kinds of fish a couple times a week. A single serving of wild salmon can often give you more than a gram of EPA and DHA combined, just like that.
And what about people who don't eat a lot of fish or who want to make sure they're consistently hitting that 2-gram goal? What about supplements? There's so many options out there. It can be kind of overwhelming.
I hear you. The quality of omega-3 supplements can be all over the place. Here's what the research says. Look for high-quality triglyceride or phospholipid forms. Those are better than the ethyl ester forms. Basically, your body absorbs and uses the triglyceride and phospholipid forms more easily, kind of like how it uses the fats you get from food naturally. And make sure you go with a reputable brand and check the label for the actual amounts of EPA and DHA in each dose. Don't just go by the total fish oil amount. Focus on those EPA and DHA numbers.
Great advice. Check the form and the actual EPA and DHA content. Now, you also mentioned something about the balance between omega-3s and omega-6s. Why is that balance important?
Oh yeah, that's super important. Omega-6s are essential too, don't get me wrong. But the problem is, the typical Western diet has way too many of them. It's because of all the processed foods and vegetable oils like corn and soybean oil that are in everything. When you have too many omega-6s, it can actually increase inflammation in your body and even make your omega-3s less effective. So while you don't need to cut out omega-6s completely, try to eat less processed food and be more careful about the types of fats you're using. Olive oil and avocado are good choices. The key is to have a good balance of omega-3s and omega-6s, which helps reduce inflammation and lets those omega-3s do their thing.
So it's not just about adding more omega-3s, it's also about being aware of other fats in your diet and creating a balance that supports overall health. It's a more holistic approach.
Exactly. It's about creating a dietary landscape that really sets you up for success.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We started with that crazy comparison to smoking, talked about the science that links omega-3s to a longer life and a healthier heart, pointed out how many people are deficient, and then gave our listeners some really practical advice on how to get their omega-3 levels up. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our audience to remember?
I want them to remember that omega-3s aren't just another health fad. They're absolutely crucial for preventing serious diseases and living a long, healthy life. The science on this is rock solid and just keeps getting stronger. Making sure you get enough omega-3s is one of the biggest, easiest things you can do to take care of your future self.
It's not about finding the next miracle cure. It's about paying attention to these essential nutrients that are often overlooked. I've even heard some researchers call them a silent lifesaver.
Exactly. And when you think about how much they can impact your lifespan and how they can dramatically lower your risk of dying from sudden cardiac death, it's pretty clear that paying attention to your omega-3 levels is one of the best things you can do for your health, both now and in the long run.
I completely agree. It's not something to put off. So, for our listeners out there, here's something to think about. Are you getting enough omega-3s? The research is pretty clear. This isn't just a small detail. It can make a huge difference in your overall health and how long you live. Your future self will thank you for taking the time to learn about all this and maybe even making some changes.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Until next time.